Aunt Mama by Rico Lamoureux, pages 1 through 3. The Cherokee dawn sky looked as though it had just been set ablaze, many of the colors appearing to reflect the palette of the rural landscape below, once home to miles and miles of cotton fields, now bare, with fields of pattern that radiated the feeling of a hidden past. This was Joseph's favorite time of the day. After working all night at a job which required him to constantly look at his own reflection, he treasured the 20-minute walk down the old dirt road leading to the isolated two-story house he called home, a visual symphony when compared to the world of mirror production. Breathing in the cool, crisp morning air, blissful thoughts of matrimony filled his mind. Just 6 more weeks until the big day, a day when he and his beloved Margaret would seal the bond of foreverness. Lunch pail in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other, Joseph could see the silhouette of an old black blind woman rocking in her chair up on the porch as he approached the house. Another lover of the dawn, Aunt Mama was born and raised in that house. Some said she had never set foot off the land, for no one had ever witnessed her doing so. Others said she was born in the early a.m., and due to the misdeeds of her ancestors, had been chosen to pay the price, that during the early hour of her birth, as the light outside overtook the darkness of her kin overtook the light in her eyes, leaving her completely blind. According to the old stories, during the last decade of slavery, the house and land had belonged to a white family who went by the surname of Matheson. They were a wealthy bunch, having made their fortune in the business of mirrors. Soon they became the South's primary producer of such products, with everything from handheld mirrors to elaborate dresser ensembles. Such success put the small town on the map, along with bringing it a new name, Destiny, for the family business's name, Destiny Mirrors. Like most other white folks during that time, the Mathesons owned slaves, many of which belonged to the same family, a family that kept to themselves. Not even the fellow laborers congregated with them during resting hours. It was as if they were feared, not only because of their manner during the day, but also on the account of the secretive rituals they would often perform before waking hours. As for the white folks, they knew nothing of it. They even seemed to be oblivious to the fact that every birth within that particular family occurred during dawn. Being the last days of slavery, many slaves were already free, some of which even acquired land. That decade also turned out to be the last decade of the Mathesons, or so it was believed. It was the first day of October, Hallows Eve, a day that started off like any other. The slaves were the first up, the house slaves preparing breakfast for their owners, the other female slaves and their children heading out to the surrounding cotton fields, the men preparing to tend to glass. The food was cooked and ready to be served, but not a single member of the Matheson family showed to the table. They were nowhere to be found. Nearby white folks came by to investigate, but the mystery remained unsolved. It was as if the family had simply disappeared. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. The fared family of slaves kept the business going as if they expected their masters to return. The only ones to suspect anything foul of the family were the non-related slaves, but they knew better than to say anything or even think on it too much, for those who did were also never heard from again, including the occasional ones who claimed to have caught glimpses of the members of the Matheson family in the mirrors around the house. Eventually, the slave family was named rightful owners due to abandonment. Over time, the Mathesons were all but forgotten about. Tales of truth or fables of fiction? Joseph didn't know, and really didn't care for that matter. It had been nearly a month since he, Margaret, and Margaret's younger sister Elise moved in on the second floor upstairs, and the only thing he knew of Aunt Mama was the kindness she had shown them. As for the house, it was like a home he never had. For a reason he couldn't explain, it provided a sense of belonging. Perhaps it was the fact that for the first time in his life, Joseph didn't have to share it with 20 other souls that were just like him. Kinless, he had grown up in an orphanage and never knew his true roots. A thought of the past that brought sorrow to his heart. But then he would think on the present and the hopes he had for the future. the purity he and Margaret shared, and the strong family they would create. No longer would his life be tainted by the past, for now he had an existence of cleanness, the pristine that only innocence could bring. "Mornin', Joseph," Aunt Mama's thick Southern accent pouring from her equally thickened lips. "I see y'all home early this morning." "Yes, ma'am," Joseph politely answered. "Workload turned out to be light last night." He mentioned to the bag of groceries as if the old black blind woman could see him. "Thought I'd come home and surprise the soon-to-be missus with breakfast in bed." "A fine young man you are there, Joseph. Not many a man would have stepped up to that kind of responsibility." She moistened her lips and continued. "Be a darling and save some of that bacon grease for me, will ya?" "Will do." Joseph entered the house, walked past the staircase, through the living room, and into the kitchen. Taking out bacon, eggs, fruit, and biscuit mix from the grocery bag, a smile came over his face. He decided to make a quick trip upstairs to place a light, warm kiss on his beloved's cheek, just to let her soul know he was home. Being quiet so as not to wake her, Joseph made his way up the stairs, that innocent glee of love still covering his face. He stealthily made his way down the hall, then turned into the bedroom doorway. His eyes found a darkness that immediately absorbed his entire being. Sitting up in bed, her back facing him, Margaret's body moved in a rhythm as if riding a wave of ecstasy. Below her, a man driving that wave. So engaged in their adulterous lovemaking, they failed to see Joseph standing there in the doorway. Devastation slowly backing him into the hallway, his back found the nearby wall. The wall also caught the back of his head, for if it hadn't been there to hold him up, his despair surely would have taken him to the ground. Mouth agape, his tears mixed with perspiration as they made their way down his cheeks, past his lips, and onto his tongue. His taste buds absorbed the salty taste of sorrow, while his sense of hearing was overtaken by the bitter sounds of Margaret's moaning. Momentarily unable to move, his mind was taunted by the random thought that he would never again be able to taste a salty substance without being thrown back to this agonizing moment. From inconceivable shock to sickening hurt, a third emotion engulfed the entity that used to be Joseph. Anger. The medicine cabinet in the bathroom flew open, Joseph's hand darting in long enough to snatch up a straight razor.